The northern wastelands of Valmora were a place where the wind carved secrets into the sand, and the sun bleached every trace of truth until only myths remained. In this unforgiving landscape, the story of Mateo Azul Ramos began long before anyone outside the region even knew he existed. To understand how he became the most hunted figure in 2 countries, one had to understand the strange upbringing that shaped him. While other children played in dusty yards, Mateo grew up behind layers of armed guards, concrete walls, and metal gates. His father, the feared and legendary El Chapo Azul, ensured his only son lived in a world built on silence, secrecy, and survival from his earliest memories. Mateo learned to read danger the way others read books. He recognized the hum of drone engines before they appeared in the sky. He memorized escape routes through underground tunnels by age 7. He could break down a rifle faster than a grown soldier by age 10. Yet he rarely fired one. His strength, as his father realized early, was not in violence but in calculation. The ranch that served as his childhood home was more fortress than family dwelling. Its cattle pens were scattered with lookout towers disguised as broken windmills. Its barns hid encrypted radios beneath piles of hay. Even the orchards surrounding the property contained sensors buried just inches below the soil. Everything about Mateo's environment taught him that trust was fragile, that safety was temporary, and that information was the most powerful weapon. Despite the strict rules and relentless training, Mateo spent his nights not plotting warfare, but studying maps and trade routes. While other cartel heirs boasted about firepower, he obsessed over logistics. He analyzed how desert storms affected patrol schedules. He tracked how seasonal migrations of wildlife influenced thermal imaging used by border agents. He discovered abandoned train yards where detectors no longer worked and identified forgotten riverbeds that shifted just enough each year to create new, unmonitored crossings. By the time he reached adulthood, Mateo understood the landscape better than any smuggler alive. He became known by a whispered nickname, El Príncipe del Desierto, the Desert Prince. He earned the title not through violence, but through mastery of terrain and strategy. His father's old cartel relied on loyalty, intimidation, and tradition. Mateo had no interest in any of that. Instead, he built a system that operated like a puzzle only he understood. He recruited couriers who never met one another. He shifted routes weekly, sometimes daily, ensuring nobody ever had the full picture. He replaced old satellite phones with coded messages hidden within seemingly innocent weather reports. He hired Nora Villacre, a brilliant financial analyst, to layer transactions so deeply that even experienced investigators struggled to interpret them. Unlike his father, who relished being a ghost story whispered in bars and checkpoints, Mateo despised attention. Every move he made was subtle, almost invisible. His operations left nearly no trail. Law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border heard rumors of the young mastermind, but all they ever found were fragment-style tracks that vanished into stone. Electronic footprints that self-erased supply lists missing crucial pieces. Still, the nature of power is that it cannot remain hidden forever. With success came jealousy within the cartel and pressure from rival groups eager to test the young leader's abilities. As the operations expanded, the system grew more complex, and even the smallest error threatened to expose the delicate network he had created. Yet, Mateo remained convinced he could outthink everyone: agents, rivals, even fate itself. He believed the desert protected him, that the land he knew so intimately would never betray him. The very soil that had shaped his childhood, and trained his instincts, felt like an ally. But deserts keep secrets only until someone learns how to listen properly. Slowly, quietly, and without any warning to Mateo, investigators began piecing together clues he never imagined he had left behind. The legend of the Desert Prince was no longer confined to whispered rumors. His name, once unknown beyond his father's inner circle, was beginning to surface in intelligence briefings, encrypted reports, and the private conversations of people far more powerful than he realized. His empire, for the first time, had a shadow trailing behind it. And shadows, once spotted, rarely disappear. The cargo ship that changed everything drifted silently across the Gulf of Valmora, its paint peeling and its engines dead. From a distance, it looked abandoned, just another rusted vessel swallowed by the sea. But when coast guards boarded it, they sensed immediately that something was wrong. There were no signs of a crew knot, a single life jacket disturbed, not a footprint on the deck, not even a discarded food wrapper. It was as if the ship had been scrubbed clean before being set loose. What they did find, hidden behind a welded steel panel, altered the course of the investigation into Mateo Azul Ramos forever. Inside the secret compartment lay sealed crates containing chemical precursors, coded packaging materials, and sophisticated equipment used to process substances before they crossed the border. But even more valuable than the contraband was a small, palm-sized device tucked into a corner, an encrypted digital ledger. At first glance, it resembled a cheap calculator, but analysts quickly realized it held months, maybe years of financial and logistical data connected to a major smuggling operation. For weeks, digital forensic experts chipped away at the encryption. They worked in rotating shifts, sleeping in their offices, eyes strained from hours of decoding lines of scrambled characters. The device resisted every attempt to open it. Some believed it was a decoy, placed there to distract investigators from something else. Others suspected it contained the kind of information that could dismantle an empire. Eventually, after a string of algorithmic breakthroughs and a lucky discovery involving time-coded keys, the ledger unlocked. The decrypted records revealed patterns so complex that analysts spent another month mapping each transaction, cross-referencing every piece of data and reconstructing the hidden network behind it. One name appeared more than any other: Nora Villacre, a financial architect whose background was almost impossible to trace. She had no official birth records, no digital footprint, and no tax history. Her identity existed only in whispers. Every transfer she processed was masked through layers of shell companies scattered across continents. The ledger also referenced a mysterious title, El Principe. At first, investigators assumed it referred to El Chapo Azul, the aging cartel patriarch. But the timestamps and logistical notes didn't match the father's known activities. Instead, the records aligned perfectly with emerging reports of a younger figure whose strategic style differed from traditional cartel leaders. The analysts began connecting subtle details, irregular movement patterns, the disappearance of old smuggling routes, the sudden emergence of new ones, and the unusual precision behind modern trafficking operations. Little by little, the truth emerged. El Principe was not the father, but the son Mateo Azul Ramos. This revelation stunned the task force. Until then, most assumed the younger Azul played a minimal role, if any, in the cartel's inner workings. Yet the ledger suggested the opposite. He was orchestrating a meticulously controlled pipeline extending deep into the United States. The information contained within the device revealed supply chains disguised as agricultural shipments, trucking routes rerouted through forgotten industrial zones, and payments hidden within transactions for drone parts and solar equipment. It showed drops arranged in unmonitored freight yards and coded schedules disguised as meteorological updates. Every line of data pointed to a mind operating at a level of discipline and foresight rarely seen in criminal enterprises. Even more troubling was the consistency of the entries. They reflected not impulsive decisions, but long-term strategies planned months ahead. This was no chaotic cartel. Wingit was a machine, and Mateo was its engineer. As the investigation expanded, U.S. authorities collaborated with Valmarin intelligence units to track every bank address listed in the ledger. One transfer led to a decaying apartment above a hardware store. Another pointed to a luxury condo registered under a false foreign passport. A separate entry led to a warehouse filled with crates labeled as olive oil shipments. With each discovery, the investigators grew more certain that Mateo's influence was far greater than previously believed. The most chilling moment came when analysts uncovered the device's final page. A series of future projections, each marked with precise dates. The projections mapped the next 6 months of operations, including supply chain expansions and new smuggling routes. None of these routes were known to any law enforcement agency. The unraveling of Mateo Azul Ramos's empire did not begin with law enforcement closing in, but with tension brewing inside the cartel's core. For years, whispers circulated about a growing divide between the younger leader and the older generation of operatives who had once served under his father. Among them, the most dangerous was Rafael Cardenzo, a veteran lieutenant whose loyalty to El Chapo Azul had been unquestioned till the rise of his son. Rafael despised how Mateo relied on encryption and analytics instead of brute force. He believed fear built empires, not algorithms, and he grew convinced that the cartel's future should belong to someone like him, not a strategist who avoided gunfights and valued secrecy over dominance. Over time, Rafael's frustration deepened into ambition. He watched Mateo's influence expand in quiet but undeniable ways. Couriers answered only to the young heir. Safehouse schematics were known exclusively to him. Financial channels, once accessible to senior lieutenants, were encrypted under layers controlled by Nora Villacre, working solely for Mateo. With each change, Rafael felt the old guard fading, replaced by a new order he neither understood nor accepted. He believed the son was weakening the cartel's identity. To him, the empire built through decades of ruthlessness was being transformed into an impersonal network with no soul. Jealousy drove him to seek allies among those who felt similarly threatened. He found them in a small circle of smugglers frustrated by Mateo's strict rules and reduced freedom. These smugglers had once operated with near-total autonomy, but Mateo had tightened surveillance, forcing them into rigid schedules and monitored processes. They welcomed Rafael's defiance, not realizing he cared little for their grievances and far more for the opportunity they provided. Behind closed warehouse doors, in dimly lit bars, and inside abandoned train stations, he convinced them that the cartel needed a leader who understood dominance, not a youth playing the role of strategist. His plan to overthrow Mateo hinged not on violence, but on something far more calculated: betrayal to external forces. Rafael believed that if he gave U.S. authorities just enough information to cripple Mateo's operations, he could step into the ensuing power vacuum uncontested. The cartel would be forced to rely on someone experienced, someone trusted, someone like him. His arrangement began with anonymous messages sent through compromised communication lines. Each message offered small pieces of intel warehouse coordinates. outdated smuggling paths, names of minor couriers. It was enough to build trust, but not enough to expose Rafael himself. Eventually, he delivered his most valuable offering, the location of a mountain safe house known as Copper Ridge. He chose this site carefully, knowing Mateo had recently transferred several sensitive materials there. By sacrificing a single outpost, he believed he could trigger a chain reaction, positioning himself as the only capable savior. Authorities, thinking they'd located a nerve center of Mateo's network, prepared a coordinated raid. The raid unfolded at dawn. Tactical units swept the area swiftly, expecting armed resistance. Instead, the safe house was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that suggested someone had left in haste. Inside, they found abandoned equipment, scattered blueprints, and evidence of ongoing operations. But there was no sign of Mateo. What they did find, buried at the bottom of a black duffel bag, shifted their focus entirely. The bag contained hand-drawn maps of border crossing points, diagrams of tunnel entrances, and most significant of all, a coded notebook. After decoding, analysts realized the notebook did not belong to Mateo. The coded entries referenced meeting times, secret exchanges, and payment logs tied directly to Rafael Cardenzo. It documented his communications with smugglers, suspicious, financial transfers, and hints of cooperation with foreign authorities. Mateo, it seemed, had anticipated betrayal and planted evidence to expose the traitor. When word reached Rafael that investigators were now hunting him as well, panic spread across the cartel. Instead of emerging as the new leader, he had become a fugitive. Meanwhile, Mateo, aware that the foundation of his empire had been compromised, vanished into the desert without leaving a trace. His disappearance created a vacuum that tore the cartel apart and intensified the hunt from both enemies and authorities. Copper Ridge, rather than becoming Rafael's stepping stone to power, became the turning point that shattered everything. The collapse of Mateo Azul Ramos's network was not sudden. It unfolded like a series of quiet tremors, leading to an inevitable quake. After the chaos at Copper Ridge and the exposure of Rafael Cardenzo's betrayal, both us and Valmoran authorities recognized a rare opportunity. For the first time, internal fractures weakened the Azul cartel enough for outsiders to penetrate its defenses. Intelligence units moved quickly, tracing every whisper, every abandoned route, and every operative desperate enough to trade secrets for immunity. A fragile mountain of information began to stack, each fragment bringing investigators closer to the young mastermind who had managed to evade them for years. The initial leads were inconsistent burned documents, erased phone logs, and cargo manifests missing pages. But two skilled analysts, the gaps themselves revealed a pattern. They noticed that certain communications stopped abruptly the same day Mateo disappeared. Warehouses that once showed constant movement suddenly went dark. Monitoring stations identified. Shifts in encrypted signals moving away from major cities towards secluded rural zones. Every breadcrumb pointed in the same direction. Mateo was retreating deeper into isolation. Meanwhile, the cartel splintered into factions. Some loyalists remained faithful to the legacy of El Chapo Azul, believing Mateo would return to reclaim leadership. Others switched sides, forming independent smuggling rings or partnering with rival organizations hungry to seize the vacated routes. These fractures created noise-violent clashes, shifting alliances, unverified claims that made investigation difficult. But they also produced mistakes. Panicked couriers abandoned transport vehicles instead of torching them. Conflicted lieutenants leaked information to the highest bidder, Corrupt officials who once protected the cartel found themselves exposed and vulnerable, leading many to secretly cooperate with authorities for protection. Intelligence units pooled all this data, studying it alongside the decrypted ledger retrieved from the ghost ship. What emerged was a map of Mateo's dwindling mobility. Analysts identified a pattern in the rural zones where signals had appeared. The areas were connected not by roads or tunnels, but by agricultural research facilities, farmlands used for experiments with irrigation systems, soil imaging, and drought-resistant crops. On the surface, there was no reason for cartel activity in these places, but investigators noted that the Azul family once invested heavily in agricultural land to mask certain financial transfers. Someone familiar with the old system would know which properties remained off-grid, forgotten even by local authorities. The turning point came when a border arrest provided an unexpected breakthrough. Tessa Namu, a young courier caught with encrypted route schedules, initially refused to speak. She assumed the cartel would protect her or retaliate if she cooperated. But when she learned the organization was collapsing and that Rafael Cardenzo was already in custody, her resolve weakened. After hours spent in a stark interview room, she revealed that Mateo had been spotted at an isolated ranch on the outskirts of the agricultural testing region. She described the ranch as modest, surrounded by fields, with no visible guards, an unusual choice for someone raised inside. Fortified compounds. Her information triggered the largest joint operation ever undertaken by both nations. Surveillance. Drones circled the region for days, capturing thermal images and tracking unusual vehicle patterns. Ground units moved in quietly, using unmarked vehicles to avoid alerting potential lookouts. Each night, they inched closer to confirming the ranch's significance. Patterns emerged, faint lights at odd hours, smoke rising from a chimney before dawn, and occasional flashes of heat signatures likely from burning materials. Finally, when enough evidence confirmed the presence of a single occupant, authorities moved. The raid was scheduled at sunrise. Teams surrounded the ranch, moving in perfect silence. The air was heavy with anticipation, the kind that comes just before a decisive moment. Officers expected to face a maze of traps, hidden guards, or escape tunnels. Instead, what they found stunned them. Inside the dimly lit structure, Mateo Azul Ramos sat alone at a wooden table. No weapons lay around him. No henchmen stood nearby. Only ash drifted in the air from a small fire pit where documents had been burned to flakes. The young heir stared at the floor, his posture calm, almost resigned. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment, contemplating an ending he had predicted long before anyone else realized it was coming. The arrest was swift and uneventful, yet its implications rippled across two nations. News of his capture spread rapidly, igniting panic among remaining cartel members and shock among those who believed him untouchable. Rival groups scrambled to claim abandoned routes. Officials prepared for a wave of unrest, and investigators, though relieved, knew that the empire Mateo built would not disappear instantly. It had been designed to operate without a central figure, and much of it still lingered in shadows. For the first time, the Desert Prince was no longer a ghost in the intelligence files. He was in custody, and the world finally saw the face behind the network that had confounded them for years. Yet even in chains, Mateo left investigators with one unanswered question: how much of his empire had he intentionally allowed to fall, and how much of it still remained hidden, waiting to be awakened by someone else? The courtroom buzzed with a tension that felt almost physical, as though the air itself had thickened under the weight of expectation. Reporters lined the benches, typing furiously, waiting for the moment the world had anticipated since the capture of Mateo Azul Ramos, shackled and escorted by federal marshals. He entered the room with the same calm that had baffled agents during his arrest. There was no visible fear, no signs of rebellion, only a stillness that seemed out of place for someone who once controlled one of the most intricate trafficking systems ever uncovered. His silence invited speculation. Some believed he was preparing to fight the charges with a complex legal strategy. Others thought he would use the courtroom as a stage for defiance. Yet none expected what would happen next. As the proceedings began, prosecutors unveiled a staggering collection of evidence. They presented the encrypted ledger recovered from the ghost ship, maps retrieved from Copper Ridge, financial trails connected to Nora Villacre, and intercepted communications pointing directly to Mateo's involvement. The sheer volume of data painted a picture that left little room for interpretation. A young mastermind, orchestrating an international pipeline with precision. Agents who had worked on the case for years now finally saw the full scope of what they had been chasing. The courtroom watched, spellbound, as each piece fit neatly into place. The turning point came when analysts displayed the projections found in the ledger, the future operations Mateo had planned with meticulous care. These projections detailed expansions into untouched territories, new smuggling pathways hidden beneath legitimate industries, and a network designed to survive even the arrest of key operatives. It became clear that the empire Mateo constructed was not impulsive but methodically engineered to evolve and adapt. Prosecutors emphasized that if the ledger hadn't been discovered, these plans would have activated within months, cementing the cartel's influence deeper than ever. Yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, there was still speculation that Mateo would force a long, complicated trial, using delays and legal maneuvers to protect the remnants of his network. Instead, in a moment that drew collective breath from everyone present, Mateo Azul Ramos pleaded guilty. There was no shock on his face, no hesitation. It was deliberate, controlled, and precise, much like everything else he had done throughout his life. His attorneys offered no explanation. The courtroom froze in disbelief, then erupted into whispers. The guilty plea simplified the legal process, but it complicated the interpretation of Mateo's motives. Investigators questioned whether he made the decision out of resignation or strategic purpose. Many believed it was the latter. By pleading guilty, he avoided a lengthy trial that would have forced former associates and distant relatives into witness stands, putting them in danger from the cartel's surviving factions. This single act shielded them from retaliation that could have been triggered by testimony or plea deals. Others speculated that the plea granted him a quieter confinement, making it harder for enemies within the fractured cartel to locate him. Inside intelligence circles, a different theory circulated, one more unsettling. They believed Mateo had already accepted that the cartel he built would outlive him, designed to operate independently of his leadership. His plea, they argued, was not the collapse of his empire, but the final step in a plan to detach himself from the system, ensuring it survived intact. The fragmented clues left behind in seized properties, discarded notebooks, and encrypted drives hinted at structures too complex to fully dismantle. Even from a prison cell, his influence could echo for years. Meanwhile, Nora Villacre vanished without a trace. With her disappearance, investigators lost the person who might have explained the financial architecture of the cartel. Several lower-ranking operatives followed suit, slipping into obscurity before authorities could locate them. These disappearances raised further questions about what parts of Mateo's operations were still running quietly in the shadows. When the sentencing date arrived, the courtroom was filled again. Reporters expected remorse, anger, or perhaps a final declaration. Instead, they saw the same calm expression Mateo had worn from the moment of his arrest. He accepted his sentence without reaction, leaving the courtroom with the same silence he had entered it with. Yet his stillness did not bring closure. It deepened the mystery. Outside, authorities declared the case a major victory. But internally, many knew the truth. The network Mateo built was too intricate to vanish overnight. The desert prince had fallen, but the desert itself still held secrets ones that investigators feared would surface again, carried forward by unseen successors who studied his methods and waited for the perfect moment to reclaim the empire he left behind.